You may have heard there was some elections this month, and there have been some promises made by some of the winners of those elections of what might happen to education. That's what we're talking about on today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. I'm Mark Despotakis. Unless you've been living under a rock, you heard that we had some elections happen this month, and there has been a lot of reaction to those elections in a whole variety of ways. What we want to do today is talk a little bit about that, really with the lens on education and what that means in Pennsylvania, what that means nationally. So I'm absolutely delighted to have with us today Dr. Jerry Zahorchak. Jerry was the superintendent in the Greater Johnstown School District and the Allentown School District, was the Secretary of Education in the Rendell administration. So I can think of no one better to talk to us about what in the world is going on and hopefully to make some sense of it than Jerry. Jerry, thanks for being with us.
No, I'm really happy to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So let's start at the state level. We actually really didn't see much change in the legislative branch when we're looking at who controls the chambers of our General Assembly. Some numbers changed slightly. So I guess I'm curious, what's your take on what we saw happen at the state level, and then how does that impact education through what the General Assembly has kind of made up now going into the new session?
Well, in my view, and part of it would be partisan, but part of it is more or less protecting the strong public education system that we have, and hopefully will always continue to have. This election in the state house, everybody knew the state Senate wasn't going to change. The majority there is a Republican base, and they're good people. The state house was controlled by one vote. And it's very fascinating that one vote could have made the difference in terms of the agenda, because whatever party's in charge sets the agenda and gets to determine what actually gets to voting on, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's an important piece for sort of shielding and protecting the public education system. Here's why. This election, there were about 5 House seats that could have flipped, including the one that I'm sitting in the 70, well, I'm sitting next to, rather, in the 72nd district. Frank Burns was the incumbent, and he, and then 4 other House seats, if one of them would have flipped in the right direction for the people that want one thing, and you're going to see when I talk today, that one thing is the same at the federal and state level, regardless of all the noise. It's that one thing. And there was a very high-powered group of people, and especially one person with lots of money, that was trying to get us to set an agenda that would allow for vouchers in Pennsylvania. And to me, and to many people that are studying the voucher system, it just doesn't work. But it is a way, if you're a gambler and have lots of money, it's a way to say, look, if I set up a whole bunch of private schools, maybe I care, maybe I don't care about the outcomes for students, but I can make a lot of money because there's a lot of money in this business from the public coffers. So to me, that was the one thing the House held. This Representative Burns locally here stayed on. He had a good challenger, a nice person, the head of the local Chamber of Commerce, but nonetheless, that stays a one vote difference. And that brings a lot of power to. We had a lot of Republican voters here voting for that Democrat because they enjoyed this section of the Commonwealth having a little more control over the power. We don't have the speaker here. We don't have the majority whip here, or the majority leader, rather, or the whip, or the appropriations chair. Those are all big, they're all equal, but those positions are more equal. It comes also on the heels of the state funding system. If you'd like to talk about that, we can.
Yeah, we'll go to that in 1 second, but I just want to go back to this point of this this very, very slim majority. If we look back through this previous session where there was also a slim majority, there were moments where that majority was in jeopardy, because of when you're that close, if somebody goes to take another office, well, that seat becomes vacant, and then there's a special election held at whatever time. So fair to say we're probably going to run into that possibly again here in the next 2 years.
Yeah, I would say yes. And again, those kind of things that may happen, and the probability is on the side of them happening. Um, they will always put us in that one vote place, and that's there's going to be a call, I think, from me for the viewers today to do some things, and they're not really partisan things; they're policy things that you could get behind.
All right, so yeah, and we definitely want to hear that. We'll talk about that, but let's go to this funding issue that you bring up at the state. So, when we talk about the state budget every year, there are lots of factors in it, but anyone that's consuming this news in Pennsylvania knows that education funding is a huge part of that, the state budget, and a huge part of the conversation. Sometimes music educators and arts educators might not realize that this money coming from the state really does impact what they do as it comes into to local school districts. We're also on the heels of this Commonwealth Court decision that says, hey, we are not adequately funding schools and we need to put more money into it, and the state has done a down payment on it this year. But so I guess I'm just curious, for you to remind us about this importance of state funding and how that works, and then how does this court decision play into all of this too?
Ah, great questions. Uh, First of all, when the Rendell administration, I was secretary, of course, Governor Rendell, the legislature then, Republican controlled mostly, wanted to know how much does it really take to educate all children to grade level standards before graduating from high school? How much does it really take? And they did a study. They first of all they put a request for proposals out all over the country to get the best financial experts in to do this study. A group named Augenblick came in, did the study. It turns out they said there are a lot of very rural and very urban districts that are very poor in terms of the ability to adequately fund the schools so that they can adequately address kids that come to school 2 years or 3 years behind as kindergarten students, and then they don't have the apparatus in place to be able to do the interventions for those children. We're in a people business and professional people business, and it takes money to hire professionals. So that study said we were billions of dollars short, one school district at a time. Every school district, your school district, there's a number called the adequacy number. What's the adequate amount of money in that district? And then they look at where do you get your money from? Now, of some districts, and you're going to hear this in the politics of today a lot. The politics, not the policies. They'll come after the politics, but the politics will tell you we spend more than other countries, or Pennsylvania spends more than other states. Listen, if you're in King of Prussia, that's Upper Marion or Lower Marion, if you're in other areas that have a lot of property value, you can have $30,000+ per student, in special ed, maybe $60,000 per student, while other people that can't raise the money off of property taxes can't have any of that. So that's where the real gap is. So if you're spending $60,000 on special ed students, you skew the average towards a higher amount than it actually is in reality. So we've done these studies over and over. We didn't pay attention to them because when Tom Corbett came in, he and his secretary, Charles Zogby, who became the secretary after a while, really went after defunding schools. They pulled about $1 billion away. They had the rationale for saying why they were doing that. But nonetheless, it hurt. It hurt worse than COVID, in my view. We're still trying to catch up. But now we have, again, targets that were set by commissions, two separate commissions, targets for each school district, adequacy targets. And there, we've decided, Johnstown School, where I was at, four other school districts, the Rural Schools Association, the NAACP, we decided to take everybody to court. Everybody, Tom Wolf, the Secretary of Ed Rivera, the House leaders, the Senate leaders, they all went to a court case. It went through the court system for a while, up and down, before the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania says, Commonwealth Court, government court, Commonwealth Court, you have to hear it. They heard it. They, after, look, this was in the making for years. After the testimonies that went on forever, it seemed, the Commonwealth Court decided, and it's a conservative leaning court, by the way, you are about $6 billion short, and you need to fund these schools. So last year, with the new governor, was the first year after the hearing and the decision, a 900-page decision. After that decision, the legislature and the governor said, we'll put over $1 billion towards that $6 billion shortfall. Meanwhile, the cost of doing business keeps going up, and we need to do it again and again until we do that. If we want to do one thing for productivity in this state, in this nation, educate people to make productivity occur.
Absolutely. And, you hear so much of these discussions about, well, we need to diversify the workforce. Everyone doesn't need to go to college, but you still need those basic education skills to function as a citizen that you're getting in K-12 education. So we can't keep strangling that, and so we have the target now. And of course, the challenge is for, see previous question, the challenge is then for the General Assembly to, now that we've added this money last year, to say, okay, we're gonna be able to maintain that, but we're gonna be able to add more to this $6 billion target. Plus, we have to keep up with whatever the things just cost more. So this is a major challenge for our legislature to come up with some solutions here.
Yeah, and when you think about it, right now we are so heavy on property tax. The state's not doing their 50-50 share even. And it's a state responsibility under the state's constitution to provide education for young people. Yet they push it down and say, 9 board members, try to get as much as you can out of your properties. And in so many communities, rural, especially urban, you can't get money out of the property tax.
And therein is the answer, part of the answer to the inequities that we have happening, because the state is not doing the share that they did at one time. And if you want to keep up, you have to raise local property taxes. And as you just stated, that's not always doable. So it's boy, it's going to be an interesting session come January as well. I guess we'll say come February, once the budget address happens and we see what happens next.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's the truth. And that's key dates. Pay attention to those dates somewhere.
Exactly. Yes. So let's pivot slightly. Some of the news of the last week here has been the Pennsylvania Secretary of Education, Dr. Mumine, is going to step down from his position. Not an unheard of thing for a secretary to step down at some point during the governor's term. I'm just curious, from your perspective, if someone who sat in that seat for a while, what is transition like in these instances within the department?
Well, what's nice about it is they're 2 years in, more or less, and you have underneath the secretary, the executive secretary, who's now interim, you have offices held by deputy secretaries for early child, for higher ed, for basic ed, for the libraries. So you have the offices that are stable, and you have the division bureaus and division leaders under those that are all in place and have been operating. And then you have the civil service employees throughout. So the stability should be pretty easy. It's the head person's vision that gets, not messy, but that shifts a bit depending on the ideology of the newer person, even though it's under the ultimately the governor's ideologies. So I think it's
So
okay. And I contacted the secretary, and he's really fine because he's moving into a chief post with a nonprofit organization nationally, and he's happy about that. And I'm happy for him, and I'm sure we're all going to applaud that.
yeah, and yeah, of course, it makes complete sense, and we wish him well. He's been a wonderful friend of ours at PMEA for sure. So we wish him well for sure, and we'll work with whoever steps in, whether once we move past an interim position. So yeah, appreciate your thoughts on that from somebody who's been in the office. Let's pivot. All right, let's move to the federal level here, where that, of course, has the changes at the federal level have dominated the conversations everywhere. The piece of the education piece, I won't say is dominated, but has certainly been part of the discussion. So when we talk to music and arts educators for the past several years, we have talked so much about the Every Student Succeeds Act, and we've talked a lot about Title IV particularly, and here are funding opportunities where that are open for music and arts education, and here's how you access it. And our members have spent so much time advocating for that on Capitol Hill, and we've even gone to the step now of talking more about Title I and how Title I funding can be used for music and arts education. So these massive government, federal government funding programs that all funnel through the Department of Education. Well, part of the incoming administration has I don't want to say promises. Well, I don't want to go. Well, I'll say threats. Has been that some major changes potentially at the department, including getting rid of the department. What level of concern should we all have when it comes to funding, other types of mandates like getting rid of the Department of Ed, and just so many other things when it comes from the incoming administration, when it comes from even incoming members of Congress, or changing leadership in Congress as well?
I think the level of concern is extremely high, especially if you're a supporter of public education. That's where it's got to be over the top high level of concern. There are some good things with regard to children that could come about, and we'll see. We'll see if those things like child independent care, child care, independent care credits for tax purposes would help some, along with the possibilities of more incentives for child care. So they talk about child care, and they advocate for that, and that's good. But we're also seeing that things that we have to watch out for. A president does, in my view, have the right to say there's no more Department of Education under his watch, but he cannot necessarily by himself untangle Title I, Title IV, cannot do IDEA. The law does that. He talks about, he being President-elect Trump, talks about getting all these things back to the states with block grants or something. That's when I think about special ed, I think about the history. In the 1960s and 70s, it was Pennsylvania trying to take care of their own special ed systems, which got the Congress's attention, that created a public law in 1974 called 94, Public Law 92. I'm skipping on the numbers, but it became IDEA. And what I think is the problem with getting it back to the states, back then, Pennsylvania would say, look, if you're hard of hearing, or if you're blind, or if all of the categories of disabilities, we just don't do you. So you're on your own. And parents created the Park lawsuit. Pennsylvania Association of Retarded Citizens at the time created a lawsuit that got settled here, and the Congress got on to that, and they said, well, we need a federal law with this, and they promised to do some major funding for that excess cost. They never lived up to it, but nonetheless, that's why it went to the federal government, because the states were not really good at controlling for children with disabilities. I also worry about, ending universal free meals. I also worry about ending Head Start, which is talked about, restricting Medicaid expenditures for supporting students. There's a lot of issues at stake, vaccine issues, etc. Well, think about this. Our CHIP program, the Child Health Insurance Program, has, across the country, 40 million kids taking advantage of that. And then we have 20 million kids getting the free meals eating. I know every neighborhood's doing backpacks and things like that so they can eat because of, food starvation. Head Start serves 820,000 students. If eliminated, all those students would have parents looking for some type of daycare. And so the investments shift. Title I has $17 billion, and about 2/3 of the students participate in some type of Title I funded programming. And then the $16 billion, almost 17 going to IDEA. Again, that was 94-142 law that came about because of the way states treated this stuff. But here's the deal, and I think pay close attention to this, and then I'll ask for your help. Look, if I can make as much noise as a strategy about how terrible education is, how we need to stop, federally funding education, how they're indoctrinating children with critical race theory or DEI. They don't suspend children. They should be expelling and suspending immediately. There should not be. Now, these are all statements, so I'm not making these things up, coming out of the mouths of the strategist and the president-elect. Let's get rid of teacher tenure altogether. There should be no tenure. The same thing at the higher education level and the noise. But listen carefully. I think this is really about one issue. If I can break up the public system, there's a good gamble for me to make real money setting up schools. It's not the typical traditional Catholic school or Christian school. It's setting up a lot of schools. And when you think about it, if it was just religion, we have 200 Christian types of religions. We have 100 plus other religions. That could cause us, if we think two parties are bad, think about the indoctrination of children in that direction. That's not the goal, though. The goal is, if I can make enough chaos and you're fighting over Title I or you're fighting over IDEA or who controls the Department of Ed, can I come up through the middle with this thing that the president has said it? You hear people in Pennsylvania talking about it: vouchers, 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 school choice. And here's what we got to do for any one of those issues. Is it okay, Mark, if I transition now to the call out?
Absolutely.
How can we help?
Absolutely. Give us some advice here.
Think about it. At the state level, you have the House and the Senate, and of course the governor. At the federal level, we have congressional offices. And every one of us has a district office, or we have two senators, a new senator and Senator Fetterman. So if you have Republican people, because the offices that are controlled by Republicans will probably vote in the direction of what the president is asking for and getting to vouchers ultimately. But if you have Republican people who like their public school system, calling those offices and saying, look, I'm a constituent of yours. I need you to help us hold the line against making these kind of moves that are going to be detrimental to public education. And you can go issue by issue, or you can just say, look, I don't want a school choice that's talked about over and over, that's not working in most places. The 3 states and conservative states have rejected from their individual ballots. But if we're not active, and that doesn't mean you have to be a partisan. I mean, look, I enjoyed when leaving the office and coming to the office that I held in Harrisburg, when people said he has the support of both Democrats and Republicans in the Senate and the House of Representatives. I think we could talk to each other. My gosh, we're not uncivil people. but why do we want something, or why are we opposed to something, and letting those people who are going to vote for real, our representatives in this form of government, make these decisions. Just letting them know. And it doesn't have to be a mob. It has to be phone calls and letters and getting together and saying, look, for us, here's what we're thinking.
Yeah, and the fantastic advice. Do it at the state level. Do it at the federal level as well. We find so many times in Harrisburg, particularly, where there is so much bipartisanship, where there is agreement. This, as you talked about earlier, this investment, this $1 billion or so investment in the past year in education could not have happened unless there was bipartisan support for the idea. So at the state level, it's happening, but they want to hear from you. They want to hear exactly what you just said, Jerry, but also they want to hear your stories of your students so they understand the value of this. And then that also works at the federal level. It's
Mark,
crucial to do it there.
It just gave me chills when you said your story, your students. The chief law firm, the lawyers that represented the public education system seeking more money in the Commonwealth Court, said it was because the strategy was they took real children and their parents into the trial. It wasn't just a bunch of talking head administrators. It was real kids, real teachers talking about conditions in the workforce, real children talking about their wanting for a better education, that caused that case to shift. It caused the Chief Justice of the Commonwealth Court to really get passionate about what was at stake and what the issues were.
And so there you go, right? And I think when you have some representatives who may be elected and education is not in their wheelhouse, education is not their issue, it is all the more important to engage with them so that they truly understand, instead of just saying, well, they're against this. Well, maybe they just don't know yet. And maybe if you and enough colleagues can say, yeah, here's the reality of what's happening in our school, that helps them to have a better understanding. And then when it comes time to vote, they're going to remember that.
You bet.
Yeah. Well, Jerry, you have provided a lot of wonderful information today, some great insight. We appreciate that so much. And we appreciate your advice to all of us, because you've been on the receiving end of this as well, when people have come, in your role, even as a superintendent, but certainly as your role as the Secretary of Education, coming and asking for things certain ways. So greatly appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being here.
And thank you all for joining us on this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. We want to thank our sponsors, the Grove City College Department of Music and Zezwitz Music. We'll see you next time.